Hey everyone, and welcome to my channel. For those of you who are new here, I basically discuss property related matters and aim to inform people about the complicated world of real estate in the UK. Today's topic is lease extensions. I'll be covering what a lease extension is, why you might need one, and how to go about getting it done. And I'll be focusing mainly on flats, not houses, because there are houses in the UK that are leasehold. Disclaimer, this isn't property advice, and always remember to consult a professional when making any financial decisions. Right, let's dive straight into it. So, number one thing people need to remember is that when you buy a flat in the UK, the chances are it will be a leasehold property. And therefore, it's a depreciating asset because you only own it, you only own the right to occupy a space for a fixed period of time. Now, some examples of typical kind of lease terms are 99 years from, let's say, 2006, or 125 years from 1980. Now, when the lease gets to zero, the space you own for that period of time essentially reverts back to the freeholder. And that's why it's important to always make sure that your lease is long. Now, in the property industry, a long lease is considered anything over 80 years. However, some banks might not consider actually granting a mortgage on a flat unless the lease length is over 85 years, some even 90 years. How do I extend my lease, I hear you ask? So the Leasehold Reform, Housing and Urban Development Act 1993 states that someone who has owned their flat for 2 or more years is entitled to a lease extension of 90 years to their current unexpired term, with the ground rent reverting to a peppercorn, which basically means zero. So for example, if you currently have 85 years left of your lease and you pay, let's say, about £100 of ground rent every year, you will end up with 175 years with zero ground rent. To instigate the process, a legal notice needs to be served. It's usually done by your solicitor. This is something called a Section 42 notice. That notice will be filled with some legal bits and, most importantly, kind of the amount you're proposing to pay to the freeholder for extending your lease. Now, to get to this figure, you would usually instruct a valuation surveyor who would carry out an inspection, research the market, do some maths, and advise you on what that figure needs to be. Now, after your solicitor served that notice, the freeholder has just over 2 months to come back to you with a counter offer called a Section 45 notice. In there, it will likely say something along the lines of, "I do not accept your offer, I want more money." They could just accept your offer, but very rarely do they just accept the first figure that's thrown at them. It's probably a good time to point out that once a Section 42 notice is served, you do actually become liable for the freeholder's valuation fees and their solicitor's reasonable fees. Now, going back to the Section 45 notice. Once your solicitor receives a copy from the freeholder's solicitors, there's a 6-month window where the matter can be negotiated and settled. Depending on how apart those two figures are, both sides would normally instruct their surveyors to negotiate on each of their behalves. If an agreement can't be reached, you have the option of applying to the first tier tribunal to have the matter kind of essentially settled in court. If both sides manage to agree, the matter is then passed back to your solicitor. They draw up new lease terms. You and your freeholder would sign those lease terms, and the solicitor would then register them at the land registry. And boom, just like that, you have a newly extended lease. Now, what I've just said was a fairly simplified description of what the actual process looks like. The timeframes can take up to a year because obviously you have the 2 months where you're waiting for the counter notice, and then you have 6 months to negotiate that. So that's already 8 months. If it then goes past that time, it could take a few months before the court issues directions, and then if you have to go to tribunal. I'd say a lot of the cases don't actually end up in tribunal because most cases can be amicably settled through negotiation. Now, the whole point of extending your lease is, of course, to protect and enhance the value of your property, because if you let your lease run down really low, especially below 80 years where it's considered a short lease, and there's going to be extra bits to the calculation which kind of increases the premium payable for your lease extension. So ideally you want to sort out your lease extension before it gets to 80 years, and if you've let it drop below 80, then you have to be prepared to pay a higher amount. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Remember to send this to anyone you know who owns a flat or is thinking of buying a flat, because obviously, like I said, leaving a lease to run down quite low, especially if it drops below 80 years, can become really expensive to extend. If you yourself have found this useful, remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more property content. Stay healthy and see you at my next video.